Named Isabella Baumphrey from birth, Sojourner Truth was born around the year 1797, with the exact date being unknown. This is a result of Truth's date of birth not being recorded, which was typical of children that were born into slavery. Young Isabella was born into slavery in Swarterkill, New York, as the 10th of 12 children. Her father James was a slave captured in modern-day Ghana, and her mother was a daughter of slaves from Guinea. The Baumphrey family was owned by Colonel Hardenberg, who bought Truth's parents from slave traders and kept them and their family at his estate in Swarterkill, New York. When Colonel Hardenberg died in 1806, 9-year-old Truth was sold at an auction to John Neely near Kingston, New York. It was until that time that Truth only spoke Dutch as a result of Swarterkill, New York, being Dutch-owned. John Neely was described as cruel and violent, with Truth later explaining how he beat her daily. In 1808, Neely sold her for $105 to a tavern keeper named Martin Shriver of Port Ewan, New York. Yet after only 18 months with Martinus, he sold Truth in 1810 to John Dumont of West Park, New York. Truth would go on to spend the majority of her adolescence with the sexually abusive Dumont and his second wife. The years she lived enslaved to Dumont were extremely unpleasant. The constant sexual abuse that Truth endured at the hands of Dumont created significant levels of tension between Truth and Dumont's wife, who made her life even more miserable than it already was. In 1815, with Truth aged around 18, she fell in love with an enslaved man named Robert from a neighbouring farm. However, Robert's owner forbade her relationship with him as he did not want Robert to have children with Truth. This is because Robert's owner did not own Truth, and therefore, he would not own any children she birthed. Despite the warnings from Robert's owner, he kept secretly meeting up with Truth. However, one fateful day, Robert's owner found the couple together and went on to violently beat him. The violence only stopped when Dumont intervened. Sadly, after that day, Truth never saw Robert again. What exactly happened to him after the incident is unknown, but it's thought that he died a few years after. This traumatic experience was said to have haunted Truth for the rest of her days. While Truth was young, she gave birth to 2 children, James and Diana. Unfortunately, James died while still a child. Meanwhile, Diana, who was born in 1815, was the result of her slave owner forcing himself on her. Around 2 years later, Dumont forced Truth to marry an older enslaved man named Thomas, whom she bore 3 children with, Peter, Elizabeth, and Sophia. In 1799, the state of New York started to legislate the abolition of slavery. Despite this, the true emancipation of those people enslaved in New York was not complete until July 4th, 1827. At this point, Truth's slave owner had promised to grant her freedom a year before the state emancipation in 1826, but only if she was doing well and was faithful. Despite this, Dumont decided against this and claimed that a hand injury sustained by Truth made her less productive. Now nearing 30 years old, Truth was angered by this, yet for now she had no other choice than to continue working away. In late 1826, Truth managed to successfully escape to freedom with her small daughter, Sophia. However, she was forced to leave her other children behind, as they were still bound to their owners and would not be legally freed in the Emancipation Order of 1827. Not long after achieving this newfound freedom, Truth learned that her 5-year-old son Peter had been illegally sold by Dumont to a fellow slave owner in Alabama and was being severely abused by the people that were enslaving him. She took this issue to court, and in 1828, after several months of legal proceedings, she eventually managed to get her son rightfully returned to her. In taking this issue to court, Sojourner Truth became one of the first black women to go to court against a white man and win. Looking to finally begin a better life, Truth moved with her son Peter to New York City in 1829, where she worked as a housekeeper for Elijah Pearson, a Christian evangelist. Then, in 1832, she met Robert Matthews and went to work with him as a housekeeper at the Matthews Kingdom Communal Colony. While working for Matthews, Truth's son Peter took a job on a whaling ship in 1839, and Truth received letters from him between 1840 and 1841. Finally, in 1842, the ship docked in Nantucket's harbour, and Truth was excited to reunite with her son. However, Peter was nowhere to be found. What exactly happened to him is unknown. All we can be certain of is that Truth would never hear from her son again. Since adolescence, Truth claimed that she had visions and heard voices. She attributed these experiences to being communications from God. In 1843, Truth became a Methodist and changed her name. Up until this point of her life, she was known as Isabella Bauntfree, but from this point onwards, she would famously be known as Sojourner Truth. According to Truth, she chose each part of this name specifically. Sojourner, because she had to travel up and down the land showing people their sins and being assigned to them, and Truth, because the Spirit of God spoke to her, telling her to preach the truth. She mentioned this to her close friends and acquaintances, saying, "The Spirit calls me, and I must go." Shortly after, Truth left New York City, making her way to Massachusetts. She did this in order to campaign for the abolition of slavery and to make her voice heard all over the eastern part of the US. Following this, Truth started to attend Millerite camp meetings. This group followed the teachings of the American Baptist preacher William Miller, who predicted and preached that the return of Jesus was close. According to Miller, he would return between the years 1843 and 1844, consequently ending life on earth. Truth found great appreciation in these circles, drawing large crowds whenever she spoke, preached, or sang. However, like many others, Truth distanced herself from her Millerite network after Jesus' second coming never occurred. After leaving the Millerites behind her, in 1844, Truth became a part of an abolitionist-founded group called the Northampton Association of Education and Industry. This organization was very forward-thinking, supporting women's rights, religious tolerance, and even pacifism. Truth had similar beliefs to many fellow members, and thanks to the support from this group, she successfully delivered her very first anti-slavery speech. This marked the beginning of her life as an activist. As time passed, Truth continued to work and speak in public. In 1850, she saved enough money to purchase a house in Florence, Massachusetts. That same year, she was invited to speak at the first National Women's Rights Convention, which was held in Worcester, Massachusetts. As time passed, Truth's reputation grew in abolitionist circles, and by 1851, she was giving lectures throughout New York State, along with the abolitionist and speaker, George Thompson. Yet, it wasn't until a few months later that she rose to true prominence. The moment that acquired her such fame happened in May, where Truth attended the Ohio Women's Rights Convention and delivered her most famous speech on women's rights, later to be known as "Ain't I a Woman?" This speech demanded equal human rights for all women, as well as for African Americans. It is said that Truth took the stage with a demanding and composed presence, with audience members being perplexed by the way she carried herself and more hesitant to believe that she was even a woman, prompting the name of her speech. The first version of the speech was published a month later by Marius Robinson, an editor of the Ohio newspaper, the Anti-Slavery Bugle. Robinson attended the convention and recorded Truth's words for himself. However, the speech did not include the question, "Ain't I a woman?" Not even once. The famous phrase, however, would appear 12 years later with a southern-tinged version of the speech. However, it is extremely unlikely that Truth, a native of New York, whose first language was Dutch, would have spoken in this southern idiom. Truth's views were considered radical, even in abolitionist circles. She sought political equality for all women and reprimanded the abolitionist community for failing to seek civil rights for black women as well as men. On top of this, she voiced her concern, stating that it's possible that the movement would dissolve after achieving victories for black men, leaving both white and black women without suffrage and other key political rights. These views at this time show what an important figure Truth was, and still is, within both the civil rights and feminist movements. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, and until its conclusion, Truth aided the Union cause by recruiting African American troops for its army. In 1864, she was hired by the National Freedmen's Relief Association in Washington, D.C. Truth worked very hard within the association, trying her very best to improve conditions for African Americans. In October of that same year, she even met with President Abraham Lincoln to discuss these matters. Even after the war, Truth was not finished. She turned her attention to battling new problems such as racial segregation on public transport, the poverty of Southern African American refugees, and general unemployment and land shortages among African Americans. Her smart exploitation of her reputation through photography and print helped her to become one of the most renowned orators of the century. In 1870, Truth was invited to the White House, where she had a meeting with the President Grant. 2 years later, she was back in Battle Creek, Michigan, and became an active member of Grant's presidential re-election campaign. Truth even went to the polling station on election day, trying to vote and further make her voice heard, but being a woman, she was turned away. Even towards the end of her life, not everyone welcomed Truth's preaching and lectures. However, she had good friends and very good connections to influential people at the time. Nearing the end of her life, Truth grew weak and ill and was looked after by 2 of her daughters. Sojourner Truth died on the 26th of November, 1883, at the age of 86 at her home in Battle Creek. Her funeral was held just 2 days later at the Congregational Presbyterian Church with nearly 1,000 people in attendance. She was then buried in the city's Oak Hill Cemetery. African American social reformer Frederick Douglass offered a eulogy for her in Washington, D.C., which compiled her achievements and impact beautifully. Venerable for age, distinguished for insight into human nature, remarkable for independence and courageous self-assertion, devoted to the welfare of her race, she has been for the last 40 years an object of respect and admiration to social reformers everywhere. To commemorate Sojourner Truth's life and work, many memorials have been erected in her name. These include plaques, monuments and statues in many US states, including Michigan, Ohio, New York, California, and Washington, D.C. As well as this, many works of art have been inspired by Truth and her life. In 1862, American sculptor William Wetmore completed a marble statue named the Libyan Sibyl. The work won an award at the London World Exhibition. In 1892, artist Frank Corter was commissioned by Francis Titus to paint the meeting between Truth and President Abraham Lincoln that occurred on October 29, 1864. In 1945, Elizabeth Catlett created a print entitled I'm Sojourner Truth as part of a series honouring the labour of black women. The print can be located in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection. She would later create a full-size statue of Truth, which was displayed in Sacramento, California. In the United States, and even around the world, it's widely acknowledged that Truth left behind a legacy of courage, faith, and fighting for what's right and honourable. Without a doubt, Truth's life and the impact that she left behind can still be seen today. Thank you everyone for watching this video on Sojourner Truth. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave me a like and a comment down below. If you're new, why not subscribe? And if you don't have notifications turned on, please do. There's a new video out every single Tuesday. If you have any recommendations, please send me an email, which is found in the description, or a comment, and hopefully I will see you. Anyway, I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks!